Welcome to our fifth lesson in our Macbeth GCSE revision series. If you're sitting an exam paper on Macbeth this year, next year, the year after, then there's some really good stuff in these videos for you. Over the last few weeks, we've been going through some characters together. We have one more character to do by request, which is going to be Malcolm. So we're going to do him next week. But today's lesson, we're going to start diving into some of the themes in Macbeth, starting with good versus evil. If you haven't seen any of the videos on Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, Macduff, the witches, I highly recommend that you check those out. There's, same as every video, lots of key quotes and model answers, everything that you need basically to set yourself up for success if you're writing an essay on Macbeth in your GCSEs, or even not for your GCSEs, even if for a different exam, that might help. Okay, so we're going to go into good versus evil. And normally I bring good versus evil up to the top. So I'm wondering where they've gone. That's a bit worrying. Here we go. Okay. Don't know why it was down here. Sorry about that. So good versus evil, one of the most important themes in Macbeth as a play. The good side, it's almost literally like two tribes in some sense in this play. So the good side are really, Duncan, Macduff, Malcolm, and then in fairness, the loyal thanes, the thanes that are loyal to Scotland and not loyal to Macbeth, those are also ultimately the good side. And then you've got the evil side. So the evil side, obviously Macbeth, you've got Lady Macbeth, you've got the witches, you've got the murderers. Now, one thing that I would say as well, actually, in terms of good versus evil, just to shout out to Banquo. Banquo was also definitely good till he was murdered. And so were the Macduffs, like Lady Macduff and the kid and everything. But, I'm not trying to do an exhaustive list of every character here. So good and then evil. The idea of good versus evil in this play is very important because it forms a moral message. So at the time when this play was first written and performed, there was what was called the gunpowder plot. So the gunpowder plot was this man called Guy Fawkes and some co-conspirators who tried to help him, effectively to blow up the Houses of Parliament and kill James I. Now, there were multiple reasons why Guy Fawkes and these others wanted to kill James I. It was James I's religious beliefs. There's this big separatism between Catholics and Protestants. So that was a big tension. There was also the fact that James I was a Scottish king. They didn't like, a lot of English people didn't like having a Scottish king. They wanted an English king or an English queen. So there were multiple reasons. So the fact that the evil side in Macbeth, their entire thing is committing regicide, killing Duncan, taking over the throne that doesn't belong to them, etc., breaking the chain of being. It does form this moral message. And it goes a bit deeper than that. It could even be going as far as to say that when Guy Fawkes was trying to kill James I and trying to remove what seems to be the divine right of kings, he was actually arguably on the side of evil to the point of, Satan. And we have to remember that in the Jacobean era, when this was written, 99.9% of people would have been Christian/Catholic. They would have believed in God, Jesus, Satan, witchcraft, supernatural, all this stuff. And James I even wrote a book, didn't he, called Demonology, which was all about witches, warlocks, fairies, elves, just, mythical supernatural creatures. So there is this moral message through good versus evil. There's also a link to what nobility should look like, not just nobility actually, but royalty and nobility. So royalty should be kind and giving and generous, but also discipline the subjects when necessary. So Duncan is a good king because when the original Thane of Cawdor tries to overthrow him, he has him executed. That's a good thing. He's being punished for trying to kill the king. But at the same time, he's also a good king because he rewards good behavior, good action. So he rewards Macbeth with a new title, the Thane of Cawdor. He rewards Banquo by thanking him. He thanks all of his thanes and all of Scotland, all of the people that fought to keep Duncan king. So that's what good should look like in terms of royalty. Macbeth obviously is the opposite of that, where people are punished and killed for nothing. At the end of the play, I nearly fell off my chair. At the end of the play, Macbeth even says to his attendants and servants, "Go and hang people who are stirring up fear." So he's killing innocent people who are just scared because that seems like there's a war or a battle that's about to happen. So he punishes and he rewards things that should be punished. So he rewards the murderers for killing people. So do you see how it's this inverse, right? And that's exactly what the witches want. That's exactly what the witches are talking about when the witches say fair is foul and foul is fair. Good is bad and bad is good. That's exactly what Macbeth does. So he's the opposite of what good should look like and what good royalty should look like. And then you've got nobility. Obviously, Macbeth is the opposite of what good nobility should look like. So Banquo is what good nobility should look like. Macduff is what good nobility should look like. Nobility just means the noble class, the noblemen, noblewomen, lords, ladies, thanes, thainesses. I don't know if that's a word, but it's those kinds of people and how they're supposed to act. So Banquo acts as a thane should. Obviously, Macbeth doesn't. Macbeth kills Duncan instead of protecting him. Banquo is so fiercely good that Macbeth has him killed because he's so afraid of Banquo's goodness. And then Macduff, he is loyal to Scotland. He's a good nobleman. He goes to Malcolm, and it's that goodness which, unfortunately, is at least a bit at the beginning is punished because he goes to Scotland, and in going, he goes to England, and in leaving Scotland, going to England, his family is killed. Right. So there is this pain to the fact that a lot of good in the play is punished until the end, the catharsis, the relief of Macbeth dying, the chain of being restored, and Malcolm saying, "I'm going to name all my thanes earls," and rewarding them the way they should be rewarded. We've then got, I've already talked about the gunpowder plot, I've already talked about the Divine Right of Kings, and just finally a little bit on the chain of being. So the fact that Macbeth's evil disrupts the chain of being, which means that good is harder to happen until the chain of being is restored, until the Divine Right of Kings is restored. So that's the way that you would talk about good versus evil. You would talk about it in terms of the morality of it. You would talk about it in terms of how characters are good or are evil and this battle between them. And ultimately, good wins, which is interesting because it is a tragedy, but it's more the tragedy of Macbeth, the tragedy that and Lady Macbeth, the tragedy that people fall into sin and corruption and destruction, and they aren't saved. So that's the tragedy. The tragedy is that Macbeth is given that final option. Macduff says, "Surrender and I will let you live. You won't have a good life, but you will live." And unfortunately, Macbeth has been so corrupted by evil at this point that he can't come back to goodness. So that's how you would talk about this. All right, so let's go into, I've got 2 extracts for you here. I don't know if I'll get through both. I'll do my best. Yeah, well, hopefully. So obviously most of you will do an extract-based exam for Macbeth. Some of you won't. Whether you do or don't, bottom line is it's not bad to have some extracts. We're basically reading through bits of the play, giving you some key quotes, that sort of thing. So from Act 1, Scene 3, when Macbeth first hears that he is going to be king, or it's prophesied by the witches that he'll be king, he says, "Cannot be ill, cannot be good." So straight away, we see this conflict between good and evil, right? In Macbeth's character. He understands that the news isn't bad because, he feels that he could be king and he would be a good king, he thinks. Ironically, he's a terrible king. It can't be good either, because for him to become king, something terrible would have to happen. So we see this tension straight away. Cannot be ill, cannot be good. That links to all of these juxtapositions throughout the play, right? Fair is foul and foul is fair. Cannot be ill, cannot be good. False face must hide what the false heart doth know, etc., etc. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? I am Thane of Cawdor. Yeah? So this is maybe slightly his hubris, but as in his pride, but it's also kind of fair. Like at this point, he does deserve to be rewarded as Thane of Cawdor, really. He did fight bravely. He did win battles. So there's nothing wrong with him being rewarded for good work, right? That's still good. Same as you, if you work hard at your exams and you work hard in your life, hopefully you will be rewarded with better jobs, more money, more options, more prospects, that sort of thing, right? So when you do good, hopefully, at least indirectly, you will be given good. And I will tell you, hard work does pay off in the long run, trust me, it does. So it's not wrong here that he is happy that he's Thane of Cawdor. He does deserve this. Okay. But just to be clear, going back to that idea of nobility, even if he wasn't rewarded with being the Thane of Cawdor, it still was the right thing to do to defend his king, right? So whether he got rewarded directly or not, it's still a good thing. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? So have you ever been so scared or excited or whatever that your heart feels like it's literally beating out of your chest? That's what he's talking about here. And this is a little bit more extreme. His hair, it's the hair standing up on end. So, well, most of you probably won't have arms as hairy as mine, but sometimes if I'm really nervous or excited, the hairs literally like stand up, right? And you see this more in animals though. Like if you've ever seen a dog that's about to like, feels it's threatened, or a cat, the hairs like raise up on them, right? So as he is thinking about becoming king, it creates, his hairs are all raising up and his heart is beating savagely at his ribs. And he feels that it's unnatural. He even questions it. This seems against the use of nature. So he recognizes at the beginning that to become king, something terrible would have to happen. And it's actually going against his nature. Now, this you have to understand from the view of a Jacobean audience, right? So the Jacobean audience believed that you were part of a chain of being, you had a position in the world, and that you shouldn't push to change that position in the world. So, if you were born, if you were born a noble person or king or prince, princess, whatever, you shouldn't fight for more, but you also shouldn't seek less, right? Whereas if you were born a peasant, you were put there for a reason by God, and that you shouldn't fight to try and elevate yourself up too much, right? Now, I'm not sure that it's saying that, as a peasant, you shouldn't work hard and try and like get more for yourself and maybe eventually climb the ladder. I don't think that's what it's saying. I think it's saying that there are certain positions, and in order to get from one position to the next, big things would have to happen. So to become king, the king would have to die, obviously, right? Also, for a thane to become king, the princes and princesses and whoever else is in line to the throne would also have to die. So something really horrible would have to happen, or get out of the way, obviously. And that's what happens. Malcolm and Donalbain leave, right? Donalbain goes to Ireland and Malcolm goes to England. But so he feels at this early stage that how unnatural it is to even imagine being king. But obviously over time he embraces that, and eventually he feels entitled to be king, and he does everything in his power to stay king. So do you see how it goes from good and good rewards to evil? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. Right. So we've got the sibilance of that, all that hissing sounds. Now, the other thing you have to understand about Macbeth is that it is also steeped in Christian and biblical imagery. So Lady Macbeth, let's start at the beginning. King James I would have believed that the witches were working with Satan, right? With the actual Satan, like a devil, evil, Beelzebub, Satan, right? So the witches get their power ultimately from evil, from Satan, okay? This is the belief that Jacobeans. The witches are therefore representations of Satan. They're Satan's minions. Satan is also the snake in the Garden of Eden, in the Genesis story from the Bible, yeah? So when the snake, hissing with its forked tongue, speaks to Eve and says, you won't die if you eat the fruit, and tempts Eve to eat the fruit and to defy God. And ultimately, I guess you could say, at least symbolically, to break the chain of being, because God had put Adam and Eve in the garden and he wanted to enjoy paradise with them. They break the chain of being and they're cast out of the garden. So the sibilance here, the hissing sound of shakes single states smothered in surmise, the hissing is reminiscent of the snake. The snake is Satan. The witches are whispering in Macbeth's ear, and Lady Macbeth's ear, right? Macbeth is Adam, metaphorically. Lady Macbeth is Eve. Lady Macbeth is the one that eats the fruit first. Yeah, she's the one, the same as Eve, that is corrupted first. And then she corrupts Macbeth. But all of that starts to show here in Act 1, Scene 3 with the sibilance of that. It reminds us of the serpent, the snake, Satan hissing, right? That's why the sound is there. And remember, this is a play. So it's not a mistake that there's this many S's. And you've even got in fantastical, right? All this sibilance would have come out on the stage. So the audience would have heard this hissing sounds. And they'd have known that Macbeth is wrestling between good and evil. I do deserve to be famed. I'm scared to become king. To become king, this is the evil that would have to happen. And then finally, nothing is but what is not. Again, one of the big things with good versus evil is it does link to appearance versus reality, and it links to a subversion of the chain of being. So nothing is but what is not. That's a direct link to the broken chain of being that is being foreboded or foreshadowed, right? Because soon nothing will be but what is not. Because the Macbeths will be king, even though they're not supposed to be. They'll lie and deceive. Good things will be punished by death or pain, right? So nothing will be what is not. So this is all unpacked in this first little soliloquy. This is the first soliloquy that Macbeth does. Hopefully we've got time just about to do the second one very briefly, and then I'll do the model answer. I'm sorry, I do the best I can with the time I have in these lessons. But as always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to comment below and give it a thumbs up if you're liking this content. So if it were done when 'tis done, this is from Act 1, Scene 7. So this again is Macbeth, and he's still wrestling with good versus evil here. Okay, so if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with this his success, that but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all here, but here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. But in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poison chalice to our own lips. That's annoying. Anyway, he's here in double trust. Let me just see if I can fix that. He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued, against the deep damnation of his taking off, and pity like a naked newborn babe striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, only vaulting ambition, only vaulting ambition, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. Okay, I don't have time to cover everything I'd like in this half an hour or 25, however many minutes it ends up being session, but this is a really good extract for good versus evil. So I'll give you the high level stuff and I'll try and dive in a bit. So Macbeth, there's this irony to Macbeth when it comes to good versus evil, because he knows, as the Jacobeans knew, that there is this order to the universe from a God-created universe. There is this chain of being, there is this higher power that looks after everything ultimately. And you can go against that, and you can go to the evil side, the satanic side, so to speak. But ultimately good will win in the end. That's what happens here. But Macbeth understands this. He understands that the bad he's going to do will eventually create some sort of a consequence. So he talks about, we still have judgment here. He's questioning whether there is an afterlife at all. He talks about whether if the assassination could trammel up the consequence, then he would do this. So what he's effectively saying is he would risk his eternal soul and punishment in a hell if he could actually get away with it in this life. But even in this life, there is judgment. So he understands. Now, the Jacobean audience would have seen this as complete idiocy. And I think that probably we do too, because if there is a heaven, which anecdotally I believe there is, and a hell, which anecdotally I believe there is, if that happens to be true, we want to do everything we can to get into the good one, and everything we, and we want to avoid the bad one. But the Jacobean audience would have been even more so down that path than a modern Christian like me. They would have been like, there's definitely a heaven, there's definitely a hell. And so the idea that he would risk his eternal soul or question, maybe there isn't, that's atheism, right? So that's a fair point. Some people certainly don't believe. But that's sort of what Macbeth is saying here. Like, he would risk eternal heaven versus hell if he could get away with judgment here. But he just doesn't see how he can do that. Now, the tragedy is that Lady Macbeth gives him a path to that. So I'm skipping a bit, but that's why he says, I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent. This is a metaphor. He's talking about himself as a horse, and he needs a rider to spur him on. Lady Macbeth becomes the rider. She tells him how to get away with the murder. He believes her, and therefore he believes that he will avoid the judgment on this earth. Now, he doesn't, does he? Instinctively, I think he knows that he'll get punished eventually somewhere. He knows there's going to be judgment. He knows that eventually he'll catch up with him. And that's what happens when Macduff cuts his head off. And Lady Macbeth also doesn't escape judgment, because obviously she goes mad and commits suicide, most likely. We don't know for sure she commits suicide, but that's the most likely explanation. And he talks about how it's a poison chalice to his own lips. So he also understands, based on the chain of being, based on the divine right of kings, based on a good king like Duncan, that good is rewarded and bad is punished. Now, not directly, it's not perfect. For good, you get rewarded perfectly, and for bad, you get rewarded perfectly. But generally in this society, if you generally do good things, you generally get rewarded. And if you generally do bad things, you generally get punished. And honestly, isn't that the way the world really works? If you generally are a good person, overall, doesn't generally good stuff happen overall, right? More opportunities. And if you're generally a bad person, doesn't eventually mostly bad stuff happen? The really bad people, the criminals, don't they mostly go to jail? Don't they mostly get punished? Don't they mostly get hated? I think so. So he understands this, that there is this balance between good and evil, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He understands that he's really poisoning his own lips, and that's exactly what happens. Okay. He talks about why he shouldn't kill Duncan. He shouldn't bear the knife himself. I'm going to have to skip that imagery, but it's kind of obvious anyway. He understands that he should be good, but he chooses to be evil, and the knife imagery helps. One thing I'll say, obviously, this knife could be the dagger, which he sees later when he says, is this a dagger? Which I see before me. And then he talks about Duncan. So there's all this great imagery of good. And this makes us sick when we think about it. Like, Duncan is meek. He's been clear in his great office. His innocence and his goodness pleads like angels. And then it's juxtaposed with the evil. Like, there's this deep damnation. The alliteration of the D sounds maybe helps emphasize that this deep evil that would come from killing Duncan. But he's so innocent. He's like a newborn baby. He's like a cherubim, which is a form of like an angel sort of thing. And if this is done, then all of Scotland will cry out. The tears will drown the wind. So literally all of the Scottish will be so upset that you won't even hear the wind blowing in Scotland. You'll just hear the cries of the Scottish people because such a good king is being killed. So that's good versus evil in this extract. Let's just very quickly in 4 minutes try and sneak a paragraph in for you. So I'm just going to talk about how is good versus evil presented, or how is it significant. So good versus evil is a very central theme in Macbeth, as it is used as a means of Shakespeare conveying to the audience the need to be, the moral message to be good, particularly in a time when evil is so prevalent. Just want to check if, no, okay. Particularly in a time when evil is so prevalent in Jacobean society. I'll come back to that. That's going to be my context. I'm going to talk about the gunpowder plot. Macbeth's initial struggle to know what to do shows the nature, that his nature is innately aware that good will triumph over evil in the end. His choice to fall, or his choices which lead to his fall arc, create tragedy and form a warning for the Jacobeans. When Macbeth says, cannot be ill, cannot be good, we see the juxtaposition, we see the dichotomy within him. His hubris demands that he is rewarded for his work defending Scotland, but his more noble side understands that to become king would mean Duncan has to die. Let's just keep it that simple. Duncan has to die. Later, when he is speaking of poison chalice to his own lips, now, sometimes if there's a line break, you can put a little forward slash like that just to show that it's over 2 lines of verse. So our poison chalice to our own lips. He acknowledges that his evil will eventually be overtaken by good. As the audience, we would feel that Macbeth's actions are very foolish, and we would be relieved by good winning in the end. This is significant because Macbeth, because Macbeth, the play, was written in early 1600s, just after Guy Fawkes had tried to overthrow James I with the gunpowder plot. I'm running out of time, literally, gunpowder plot. I've officially run out of time. So all I would say to finish this is it's the moral message. It's trying to remind the Jacobean audience that they shouldn't try and overthrow their king. Sorry there isn't any more time. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Questions, comments, please comment below. I will see you in the next one.